Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world so old and mysterious that you might think you're drifting into a dream as you listen. Picture it. The golden sands of Egypt stretching beneath a sky painted in hues of deep orange and red as the sun sets behind the pyramids. The air's dry, heavy with secrets that have been buried for centuries, just waiting to be uncovered. The scent of ancient incense lingers as priests chant in the distance. You can almost feel the weight of time pressing against you, a weight that will lead us through Egypt's deepest, most shocking secrets. But hold on a second. You probably won't survive this journey through Egypt's history unless you're prepared for some serious revelations. The things you'll hear tonight are going to put you in a trance. You won't want to stop listening. In fact, you might even drift off into a deep, peaceful sleep, a sleep unlike anything you've had before. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm all about sharing this amazing journey with you. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. I love hearing from you all. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Ancient Egypt. You probably know the basics, the pyramids, the pharaohs, Cleopatra, and mummies. But did you ever stop and wonder about the everyday life of the people who lived there? Most people think about the grand monuments and majestic rulers, but few know the reality of what it was like to live in one of the most fascinating civilizations in history. It's time to go beyond the famous tourist sites and get to the stuff that history books leave out. The Egyptians weren't just about grand architecture and divine rulers. They were also about life, love, and everything in between. In fact, most people don't realize that life in ancient Egypt was a bizarre blend of mysticism, survival, and some pretty strange habits. There was much more to this civilization than we often give it credit for. But don't worry, we'll get to all the fun stuff, like the bizarre Egyptian beauty routines and their obsession with cats, soon enough. But first, let's lay the foundation by exploring how the Egyptians saw their world. The society of ancient Egypt was a complex web of traditions, rituals, and strict class hierarchies. At the top was the pharaoh, a figure who was not just a ruler but was also considered a god on earth. They were the living embodiment of the divine, chosen by the gods to govern the people. This divine status gave them absolute power both politically and spiritually. But what does it mean to be both a ruler and a god? And did the Egyptians ever question this? Historians still argue whether the average person truly believed in the godlike status of the pharaohs, or if they simply respected the power they wielded. The pharaohs were revered, but they also had their flaws. They were not immune to intrigue, betrayal, and personal drama. Take, for instance, the story of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who shocked the world by abandoning Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion in favor of worshipping a single god, the sun disk Aten. His reign was one of the most controversial periods in Egyptian history, and historians are still puzzled by his motivations. Was he genuinely trying to reform Egypt's religious practices, or was he simply chasing power in a new way? What's clear is that this period, although short-lived, left Egypt forever changed. One of the most significant aspects of Egyptian society was its emphasis on the afterlife. Egyptians believed that death was just a transition, and the afterlife was where true life began. The idea of eternal life was so deeply embedded in their culture that it shaped almost every aspect of their daily lives, from the way they built their tombs to the items they placed inside them. Every detail was carefully considered to ensure a smooth journey into the afterlife. They believed that one had to pass a series of trials before reaching the afterlife, and if they didn't make it through, they would be lost forever. This belief in eternal life drove the Egyptians to create incredible monuments to the dead, from the tombs of the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings to the vast pyramid fields outside of Cairo. But here's where it gets weird. mummification wasn't just about preserving the body for eternity. It was part of an elaborate ritual designed to prepare the soul for the afterlife. The process itself was complicated, and only the wealthiest could afford the full treatment. For the average Egyptian, mummification was a much simpler affair. But even for those who couldn't afford it, there was still a belief that the soul could survive without the body. The question is, why was the preservation of the body so important? Was it because they genuinely believed the body needed to be intact for the soul to recognize it in the afterlife? Or was it because the Egyptians just had a thing for burial rituals and found a deep comfort in the idea of immortality? Historians still argue whether the obsession with death and the afterlife was born from a desire for eternal life, or if it was simply an attempt to make sense of the inevitable. Whatever the reason, the Egyptians' fascination with the afterlife was so all-consuming that it became the backbone of their entire civilization. And we're not even halfway through their shocking secrets yet. So let's keep going and dive deeper into what made these ancient Egyptians tick. As you settle deeper into your chair, let's take a moment to reflect on the pharaohs. They were not just kings, they were gods among men. As we journey through this ancient land, you might start to wonder how much power someone could have before they truly start to believe they were divine. Pharaohs, though typically men, also included women who ruled with just as much grandeur and authority like Cleopatra. But let's focus on what made these rulers tick, their absolute reign over Egypt and the divine status they were given. Imagine this. Every single action a pharaoh took was seen as the will of the gods. Every decision they made, no matter how mundane, was connected to their divine status. They didn't just rule a kingdom, they governed the cosmic order. The pharaoh was thought to be the intermediary between the gods and the people, a bridge that held together the very fabric of existence itself. To truly grasp the gravity of the pharaoh's role, you have to understand that their word was law, but it was also gospel. If they decided a new law, it wasn't just a political move, it was a divine decree that everyone had to obey. Imagine the pressure of knowing that your every action was being watched, not just by your people, but by the gods themselves. Historians still debate whether the pharaoh truly believed in his own divine status or whether it was more of a power move to maintain control over the population. Were they just really good at managing their image, or did they genuinely think they were gods? This is one of those questions that will likely never have a definitive answer, but one thing's for sure, their godlike status was crucial for keeping their civilization in check. They were the ultimate authority in both political and spiritual matters. Now, as we move beyond the pharaohs, we need to talk about Egypt's relationship with their gods. The Egyptians didn't just have one god. Oh no, Egyptian mythology is filled with a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own personality, powers, and quirks. Some of these gods were the quintessential figures you'd expect from ancient civilizations, powerful, commanding, and wise. But others, well, let's just say they were a bit unusual. Take Hathor, for example. She was the goddess of love, music, and fertility, but also the goddess of drunkenness and joy. Quite the mix, right? Or Anubis, the god of mummification and the afterlife, who had the head of a jackal. Yes, a jackal. The Egyptians believed that Anubis's jackal form was symbolic of the protector of the dead, watching over the tombs to keep would-be robbers at bay. And let's not forget the wild and unpredictable Ra, the sun god, who was sometimes shown as a man with the head of a falcon, and other times as a literal sun disk. These gods weren't just stories. They were real in the everyday lives of Egyptians. Their presence was felt everywhere, from the grand temples of the pharaohs to the simple homes of ordinary Egyptians. The gods were invoked in everything: births, marriages, deaths, wars. In fact, Egyptians often didn't make decisions without consulting their gods, and temples played a massive role in Egyptian society. Priests were essentially the closest thing the common people had to a direct connection with the gods, and the pharaoh's job was to protect and appease these gods, ensuring the stability of Egypt's natural world. Historians still argue whether Egyptians viewed their gods as strictly spiritual entities or whether they were part of the physical world too. Did the gods represent real forces that controlled nature, or were they symbolic figures for the human experience? There's no consensus on this, and each god had multiple facets and stories that made them all the more fascinating and complex. It's almost as though each god was meant to capture the entirety of human experience, from joy to sorrow, from life to death. If you're wondering how the Egyptians kept track of all these gods and their various stories, well, they had something called the Book of the Dead. This ancient text was essentially a guidebook to the afterlife, listing all the gods and the specific ways in which they should be honored and appeased. The Book of the Dead was often buried with the deceased, a way to ensure that they would have all the knowledge they needed to navigate the afterlife successfully. It's a little like leaving a roadmap to the afterlife, a comforting thought if you're about to embark on a journey into the unknown. Of course, all this talk of gods brings us to the biggest question of all. How did the Egyptians manage to balance their belief in the divine with their everyday lives? After all, if you truly believed you were under the constant watch of gods, wouldn't you start to feel a little pressure? The reality was that ancient Egypt's deep connection with the divine affected every aspect of life, from the way they built their homes to the clothes they wore. Everything had significance, and every action had meaning. It was a world in which the divine and mortal realms intertwined constantly. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian religion was their dedication to the afterlife. While other cultures focused on the divine's involvement in the present world, the Egyptians were obsessed with what came after. Their beliefs in immortality were so strong that they poured endless resources into elaborate tombs and mummification techniques. These tombs weren't just for the pharaohs, they were for everyone. Ordinary people, though they didn't receive the same lavish treatment, still believed in the afterlife and sought to ensure that their souls would be protected after death. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' devotion to the afterlife came from a fear of death or a genuine desire to experience eternal life. Was it about avoiding death, or was it about transcending it and becoming one with the gods? Either way, the Egyptians' fixation on immortality left behind an incredible legacy, a legacy that continues to captivate us today, long after their empire has fallen. As we move deeper into the labyrinth of ancient Egypt, let's focus on something that's both fascinating and a little gruesome: the process of mummification. We all know the story: preserving the body for the afterlife, ensuring immortality. But the actual process is where things get strange. It wasn't just about wrapping up a body and calling it a day. Oh no, ancient Egyptians had an entire ritual surrounding death, and it was more elaborate than you might think. You might even find yourself a little squeamish by the end of this. The first step in mummification was a bit like what you'd see in a medical procedure today, except far more ancient. The organs, considered to be vital for the afterlife, were removed and carefully preserved. The heart, for example, was believed to be the seat of the soul. It was left inside the body for the final journey because, according to Egyptian belief, it would be weighed in the afterlife against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. If your heart was light as a feather, you'd pass into the afterlife. If not, well, let's just say things weren't looking too good for your soul. So what do you do when your heart needs to be preserved for eternity? You can't just leave it flopping around inside your chest, can you? Enter the art of the canopic jar. The stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines were removed and placed in these special jars, each one guarded by a specific god. You'd have jars for everything: and these sacred containers would travel with the deceased into the afterlife, keeping the organs safe and sound. But what about the rest of the body? If you thought they just buried the body as is, think again. The Egyptians took great care to preserve every single part. The next step in the mummification process was to remove the brain. This is where things get a little odd. You'd think the brain was crucial, right? But no, the ancient Egyptians didn't see it that way. Instead of leaving the brain intact, they would often pull it out through the nose using a special hook. The brain was discarded because the Egyptians believed it had no use in the afterlife. A little macabre, isn't it? Once the organs were dealt with, the body itself would be cleaned, dehydrated, and filled with a variety of substances to prevent decay. The body would then be wrapped meticulously in linen bandages, with each layer carefully placed to ensure the body would be ready for its journey. The process took weeks, sometimes months, and involved layers upon layers of wrappings, all infused with resins and oils to protect the body from the harsh desert elements. It was a long, intricate process, but for the Egyptians it was necessary to ensure that the deceased would live on forever. Historians still argue whether the elaborate mummification process was purely for spiritual reasons, or if it also had a practical purpose. After all, the preservation of the body allowed the deceased's tomb to remain intact for centuries, preserving not only the person but the wealth and goods that were buried with them. But did the Egyptians really believe that the body had to be perfectly preserved in order to travel to the afterlife? Or was it just an elaborate ritual meant to express their obsession with immortality? It's hard to say for sure, but one thing is certain: their obsession with the afterlife created a legacy that still resonates today. If you think that's strange, wait until we talk about the ritualistic practices that went hand in hand with mummification. The Egyptians didn't just prepare the body, they also believed that the soul had to be guided through the afterlife, and that meant performing elaborate rituals that would help the deceased navigate the many obstacles that awaited them. One of the most well-known of these rituals was the opening of the mouth ceremony. This ceremony was performed to ensure that the deceased could eat, drink, and speak in the afterlife. Priests would recite prayers, perform offerings, and even touch the deceased's mouth with a special instrument to bring them back to life, metaphorically speaking. It was a little like granting the soul the ability to enjoy life once more, except, of course, in the afterlife. But the most chilling part of mummification wasn't the process itself. It was the belief that everything about the deceased had to be preserved. Their possessions, their name, even their likeness. Tombs were filled with food, furniture, jewelry, and everything the deceased might need in the next world. It wasn't just about saving the body, it was about making sure the deceased could continue their life in the afterlife, where they would experience all the pleasures they had on earth, but without the constraints of mortality. Historians still debate whether this obsession with preserving every detail of a person's life was an attempt to control death or a way of ensuring that the spirit was forever remembered. Were the Egyptians truly afraid of being forgotten, or was it their deep belief in life after death that made these practices so essential? Whatever the reason, their mummification practices were both profound and bizarre, leaving us with a legacy of beautifully preserved bodies and an endless fascination with the ancient world. It's one thing to preserve a body for eternity, but what about the tombs themselves? As you might expect, the tombs of Egypt were just as elaborate as the mummification process. From the simple tombs of common people to the monumental burial sites of the pharaohs, these tombs were meant to last forever. The most famous of these are, of course, the pyramids. These colossal structures were built to house the bodies of Egypt's rulers and ensure that their souls would travel safely to the afterlife. But what most people don't know is that these pyramids were also a symbol of power. They weren't just tombs, they were a statement that said, "I am a god and my legacy will last forever." Now that we've covered the fascinating and somewhat gruesome details of mummification, let's shift gears and focus on another monumental aspect of ancient Egypt: The pyramids. These iconic structures stand tall as symbols of Egypt's power, sophistication, and obsession with the afterlife. But are the pyramids merely tombs, or is there more to them than meets the eye? If you thought the pyramids were just big, fancy burial sites, you're in for a surprise. The truth behind these stone giants might just leave you wondering if there's more to Egypt's ancient world than we can even comprehend. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. At nearly 450 feet tall, this massive structure was, for thousands of years, the tallest man-made building on Earth. But the true story of its construction is still wrapped in mystery. How did the Egyptians, with their rudimentary tools, manage to move massive stone blocks, some weighing more than 2.5 tons each, into place? Historians and archaeologists still argue over the logistics of pyramid construction, with various theories suggesting everything from ramps and cranes to even extraterrestrial involvement. As much as we know about the pyramids, there's still so much we don't understand. How could such an ancient civilization accomplish something so monumental without the help of modern technology? It's a question that has sparked both fascination and skepticism for centuries. But here's where it gets even stranger. The pyramids weren't just tombs for the pharaohs, they were symbols of divine power aligned with the stars. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh's soul would ascend to the heavens upon death, joining the gods. The pyramids were designed to assist in this spiritual journey. The alignment of the Great Pyramid, for example, is so precise that it points directly to the North Pole. This incredible accuracy suggests that the Egyptians had a level of astronomical knowledge that was far beyond what we typically give them credit for. Some even believe that the layout of the pyramids reflects the constellation of Orion, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. If that's true, then these grand structures weren't just architectural feats, they were cosmic gateways designed to carry the soul of the pharaoh to the stars. Historians still debate whether the pyramids were purely religious structures or whether they also had a more practical function. Were they truly meant to serve as stairways to the heavens, or were they simply massive tombs that reflected the pharaoh's immense wealth and power? Some even suggest that the pyramids were a form of propaganda, monuments built to intimidate Egypt's enemies and show the world just how powerful the civilization had become. In any case, the fact that they continue to inspire awe and wonder proves that there's far more to these pyramids than just stone and mortar. As you think about the pyramids, let's take a brief detour into Egypt's obsession with the afterlife. The entire civilization was fixated on what came after death, and this fixation permeated every aspect of their culture, from architecture to daily life. The pyramids were built not just to house the deceased, but to help them navigate the afterlife, ensuring that they reached the realm of the gods. But it wasn't just about the tomb. The Egyptians believed in an elaborate process of judgment that the soul would undergo in the afterlife, and the pyramids were meant to protect the deceased throughout this journey. At the heart of this judgment process was the weighing of the heart. In the afterlife, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. If the heart was lighter than the feather, it meant the person had lived a life of integrity, and they would be allowed to join the gods in the afterlife. If the heart was heavier, it would be devoured by Amit, a demoness with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. It's a gruesome thought, but it was believed to be the ultimate test of one's moral worth. This idea of moral judgment was central to Egyptian religious belief and was represented in many of the tombs and burial rituals. The concept of cosmic balance, living a life in harmony with the gods, was essential to Egyptian life and death. But here's where things get a little odd. While the Egyptians were obsessed with ensuring that the deceased had everything they needed for the afterlife, they were also deeply concerned with preventing grave robbers. The tombs of the pharaohs were filled with treasures, gold, jewelry, statues, and fine goods. things that the deceased would need in their eternal life. But as you can imagine, such wealth didn't go unnoticed. Tomb robbers were a constant problem, and the Egyptians had to get creative with how they protected the tombs. They devised secret chambers, hidden doors, and even booby traps designed to prevent anyone from disturbing the resting place of the deceased. Some tombs even had fake passages leading nowhere, meant to confuse any would-be thieves. But even with all these precautions, many of the tombs were eventually raided and countless treasures were stolen. The tomb of King Tutankhamun, one of the most famous pharaohs, was actually discovered nearly untouched, but it's still unclear how it managed to avoid the attention of robbers for so long. Historians still argue whether the obsession with protecting tombs and treasures was a result of genuine concern for the deceased's well-being in the afterlife, or whether it was a reflection of Egypt's growing wealth and power. Were these treasures intended for the pharaoh's personal journey, or were they meant to symbolize the everlasting wealth of Egypt itself? Some believe that the elaborate protections and treasures were just a way of showcasing the civilization's immense power and wealth, while others argue that they were a way to ensure the continued prosperity of the pharaoh in the afterlife. Whatever the reason, Egypt's tombs remain some of the most intricate and mysterious structures ever built. As we move forward in our journey, you'll soon see that Egypt's obsession with the afterlife wasn't just reserved for the pharaohs. Everyday Egyptians too had their own unique beliefs about life after death, and many of them shared in the same rituals and practices that were seen in the royal tombs. This society was one that truly believed in the idea of immortality, and it's this belief that shaped their entire culture, from their architecture to their daily routines. Let's now move into the world of the most famous and powerful Egyptian ruler of all, Cleopatra. When you hear the name Cleopatra, your mind probably jumps to dramatic tales of love, seduction, and power plays with Roman leaders like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But as much as Hollywood and history books have focused on her personal relationships, there's so much more to her story than just romance. Cleopatra was not only a shrewd political leader, but also a master at manipulating her image and playing her cards to maintain Egypt's power during a time of immense political upheaval. Cleopatra was not born into royalty by the traditional means. Her family was of Macedonian Greek descent, originally from the line of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt, but they were of Greek heritage, and over time the pharaoh's connections to Egypt's native people began to fade. Cleopatra, however, set herself apart from her ancestors. She was one of the very few Ptolemaic rulers who actually learned the Egyptian language, showing a deep respect for the culture she ruled. And it wasn't just about being a figurehead. Cleopatra was also incredibly intelligent, fluent in multiple languages, and a powerful negotiator who wielded political and military influence like a true Egyptian ruler. What's often glossed over is her sheer political genius. Cleopatra's ability to navigate the complex world of Roman politics is nothing short of remarkable. When Julius Caesar visited Egypt, he became so smitten with her that he helped her regain the throne after her brother had briefly claimed it. But Cleopatra wasn't just playing the role of a romantic interest in these alliances. She was actively ensuring Egypt's survival in a world dominated by Rome. Her relationship with Caesar solidified Egypt's place in the Roman sphere, but it was her later alliance with Mark Antony that would seal her fate. Together they formed a powerful military and political partnership that threatened Rome's control. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra's love affairs were purely personal or driven by a deep political strategy. Was she a calculating queen using sex and charm as tools to secure her kingdom, or was her passion for these men genuine? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Cleopatra's relationships with these Roman leaders weren't just about love, they were about survival. In a time when Rome was growing ever more powerful, Egypt needed the protection and influence of such alliances to maintain its autonomy. Cleopatra was no fool. She understood that alliances with powerful men would ensure Egypt's place in the world, even if it meant sacrificing her own personal desires. One of the most fascinating aspects of Cleopatra's rule was how she portrayed herself. She wasn't just the Queen of Egypt, she was the goddess Isis incarnate. In Egyptian mythology, Isis was the goddess of magic, motherhood, and fertility, attributes that perfectly aligned with Cleopatra's image. She made sure to present herself as a divine figure, often depicted as the goddess in her own royal portraits. This wasn't just for show, it was part of her strategy to solidify her power. In Egypt, where the divine right of kings was essential to maintaining control, Cleopatra made it clear that she wasn't just a ruler. She was an almost divine being who had the support of the gods themselves. But while Cleopatra was admired and respected by her people, her reign wasn't without controversy. Some saw her as a foreign usurper, someone who didn't have the right to rule Egypt because of her Greek heritage, and her relationships with Roman leaders, though politically advantageous, painted her as a woman who would do anything to maintain her throne. History has painted her as a seductress, a siren who used her beauty and charm to manipulate men. But was she truly just a pawn of Roman leaders, or was she a master of her own destiny? Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's charm and sexuality were merely a tool in her political arsenal, or whether she was a woman who wielded power just like her male counterparts. But one thing is clear, Cleopatra was a woman of incredible intellect and vision, and her story is far more complicated than the tales of love that have been passed down through the centuries. Cleopatra's life and reign were intricately tied to Egypt's survival, and her fall from power in the aftermath of her defeat by the Roman Emperor Augustus, formerly Octavian, marked the end of Egypt's independence. After her death, Egypt became a province of Rome, and the era of the pharaohs officially came to a close. But even in death, Cleopatra's legacy lived on. She became an enduring symbol of power, beauty, and political savvy, inspiring countless depictions in art, literature, and film. But let's take a step back for a moment. Cleopatra's story, fascinating as it is, only scratches the surface of Egypt's complex relationship with foreign influence. Egypt, throughout its history, was a civilization both proud and fiercely independent, but it also had to contend with the mighty force of the empires surrounding it, most notably the Greeks and Romans. Cleopatra's reign and her alliances with these powerful foreign leaders exemplify how Egypt was both a force to be reckoned with and a kingdom that could be swayed by the tides of international politics. While Cleopatra's intelligence and determination were unparalleled, she was ultimately a queen working within a very precarious system, one that could not protect Egypt from the inevitable march of Roman power. Historians still argue over Cleopatra's ultimate role in Egypt's downfall. Was she the last great protector of Egypt's sovereignty, or did her alliances ultimately hasten the collapse of Egypt's independence? Was it her love affairs that led to her downfall, or were they simply the result of her desperate attempts to secure Egypt's place in the world? These questions remain unanswered, but what we do know is that Cleopatra's life is one of the most compelling stories in the history of ancient Egypt, a tale of political maneuvering, power, and tragedy that continues to capture the imaginations of people around the world. Now that we've explored Cleopatra's captivating story, let's shift focus to something a bit more mysterious: the Egyptians' fascination with cats. You may have heard that cats were highly revered in ancient Egypt, but did you know just how deep that reverence went? Cats weren't just pets, they were seen as sacred creatures, divine beings in their own right. To understand why cats were treated as gods, we need to dive into the symbiotic relationship between humans and these mysterious animals. Cats were originally domesticated in Egypt, and their role in ancient Egyptian society was so significant that they became intertwined with both the spiritual and everyday lives of Egyptians. It all began with their prowess as hunters. The Egyptians had a major problem with vermin, mice, rats, and even snakes, which were pests that would invade food supplies and temples. Cats were the perfect solution. They would prowl the fields, homes, and granaries, keeping the pests at bay. Over time, Egyptians realized that these creatures were incredibly useful, but their respect for cats grew beyond their utility. The goddess Bastet, often depicted as a lioness or a woman with the head of a lioness or domestic cat, played a central role in this. She was the goddess of home, fertility, childbirth, and, interestingly, protection. As a warrior goddess, she was also associated with the fierce lioness, but in her more peaceful form, she was embodied by the domestic cat. Bastet's connection to the cat made these animals sacred, and they became symbols of the home's divine protection. If a cat purred on your lap, you were essentially basking in the blessings of Bastet herself. The cat was not only a companion, but a spiritual guardian, and this sacred connection led to an interesting set of rules regarding their treatment. Killing a cat, even accidentally, was a grave crime in ancient Egypt. In fact, Egyptians would go so far as to make elaborate laws protecting cats. There are reports that if a person killed a cat, they could face the death penalty. This wasn't a minor infraction, it was seen as an offense against the gods themselves. The reverence for cats became so intense that families would sometimes have their cats mummified, just like humans. The mummified cats were placed in tombs to accompany their owners in the afterlife, ensuring they would continue to protect their families even after death. Some tombs have been discovered filled with thousands of mummified cats, showing just how vital these animals were to Egyptian society. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians' devotion to cats was solely a result of their belief in the gods, or whether it was due to their deep appreciation of the cat's role in society. Were they worshipping Bastet, or were they simply acknowledging the natural prowess of cats as hunters and protectors? It's likely a combination of both, with the spiritual connection adding a deeper layer to the practical benefits of having cats around. Cats had a significant impact on Egyptian culture, becoming symbols of mystery and grace. Their independence and ability to slip in and out of spaces unnoticed made them seem almost magical, like beings who could communicate with realms beyond our understanding. Interestingly, Egypt's reverence for cats wasn't unique to them. While the Egyptians made cats famous, other ancient civilizations also had similar relationships with the creatures. However, Egypt's worship of cats went beyond any mere superstition or pet ownership. It was a full-scale spiritual reverence. Cats were gods, companions, and protectors all rolled into one. Now take a second and think about your own cat, if you have one. They can be a little aloof, maybe even a bit mysterious at times, right? Well, imagine living in a world where that aloofness was seen as divine. Imagine knowing that your cat's gaze, those half-lidded eyes, could carry the weight of ancient power. It's a strange and almost comforting thought. If you live in Egypt all those centuries ago, that little cat on your windowsill might have been your spiritual guide to the afterlife. But the role of cats in Egyptian culture went beyond the homes of the rich and famous. While pharaohs and noble families could afford lavish ceremonies and mummifications for their beloved cats, ordinary Egyptians also cherished their furry companions. In fact, cats were so valuable that they became part of Egypt's trade routes. They were sent to other countries as gifts, and it's believed that the spread of cats to Europe and Asia was heavily influenced by Egypt's strong economy and cultural influence. By the time the Greeks and Romans began to expand their empires, cats were well on their way to becoming the global symbols of mystery and independence they are known as today. But let's shift gears a little and talk about something even more curious, the way the ancient Egyptians interacted with death. The belief in the afterlife was so strong that it shaped every part of Egyptian life. But what if we told you that Egypt's ideas of death and the afterlife were just as puzzling as their reverence for cats, one of the His strangest beliefs involve the idea of the Ka and Ba. The Egyptians believed that a person had multiple aspects to their soul. The Ka was the life force, the Ba was the personality, and the Ach was the form that could ascend to the afterlife. To ensure that these parts of the soul would live on forever, Egyptians needed to ensure that the body was well preserved. But even more curious was the belief that the Ka could continue to interact with the world. Offerings to the deceased were often made at tombs, and the Ka was thought to require sustenance for eternity. This belief in the continued presence of the soul was so strong that Egyptians placed items in tombs that they thought would be useful in the afterlife, from furniture to food, and even tools for daily life. Historians still argue whether this belief in the soul's persistence was an attempt to achieve immortality or simply a way of making sense of the inevitable fact of death. Did Egyptians truly believe their souls lived on forever, or were they trying to create a comforting framework for dealing with mortality? No one knows for sure, but one thing is certain: this belief in the afterlife was a cornerstone of ancient Egyptian culture, and it shaped nearly every aspect of their society. Now, let's dive into the eerie world of Egypt's most infamous legend, the Curse of the Pharaohs. This isn't just a creepy bedtime story. It's a phenomenon that has intrigued archaeologists, tourists, and conspiracy theorists for decades. If you've ever heard about the mysterious deaths surrounding the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb, then you've already stumbled into the legend that has become one of Egypt's most enduring mysteries. The curse is said to have been unleashed after the tomb of King Tut was opened in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter. After the discovery, a series of untimely deaths seemed to follow the expedition, leading many to believe that a deadly curse had been unleashed on those who dared to disturb the pharaoh's final resting place. The most famous victim of the curse was Lord Carnarvon, the financier behind the expedition, who died suddenly of an infected mosquito bite shortly after the tomb's discovery. His death, paired with the fact that several others connected to the tomb's opening met untimely ends, fueled the belief that the curse was real. The idea of a curse is intriguing because it taps into something much deeper than just superstition. It's a cultural fear rooted in ancient Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. Egyptians believed that when someone died, their spirit could wander the earth unless properly preserved and honoured. The tomb and its contents were meant to ensure that the spirit of the deceased had everything it needed to transition into the afterlife peacefully. To disturb a pharaoh's tomb was considered an act of great disrespect, one that could anger the gods and lead to disastrous consequences. So did the Egyptians really believe in a curse that would plague anyone who disturbed their tombs? Historians still argue whether this belief was part of the elaborate security measures intended to protect tombs, or simply a myth that grew in the wake of strange events. Was it a genuine curse or just a series of unfortunate coincidences? But the curse of King Tut wasn't the only time ancient Egypt's tombs were said to unleash disaster. The tomb of Seti I, another famous Egyptian pharaoh, also had rumours swirling around it. Some say that upon entering his tomb, one of the first things Carter and his team saw was an inscription warning of the dire consequences of disturbing the pharaoh's resting place. The warning reads, "Death will come on swift wings to those who disturb the peace of the king." While no deaths followed this particular discovery, the legend of the curse was further cemented into popular culture. Interestingly, many Egyptologists and archaeologists dismiss the notion of a curse, arguing that the deaths surrounding the opening of Tut's tomb were likely the result of bacteria or mold that grew in the sealed tomb after thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian tombs, especially those that were hidden in the desert, were often sealed tightly for centuries, creating the perfect environment for harmful microorganisms to thrive. A more scientific explanation suggests that those who entered the tomb may have unknowingly inhaled spores or bacteria that led to their illnesses. But let's face it, the supernatural explanation makes for a far more exciting story, doesn't it? Beyond the curses and the legends, ancient Egyptians also created complex security systems to protect their tombs from thieves. The tombs of pharaohs like Ramses II were filled with treasure and elaborate artwork, and it was believed that robbing a tomb would anger the gods. To prevent this, tombs were often hidden in remote areas, like the Valley of the Kings, and were sometimes sealed with traps or false doors. There are stories of secret passages designed to confuse robbers and make it impossible to locate the burial chamber. In some cases, ancient Egyptians even employed tomb guards, some of whom were possibly buried alive to continue their watch in the afterlife. But despite these measures, tomb robbing became a major problem for the Egyptians. While most tombs were intended to remain undisturbed for eternity, many were looted for their treasures long before modern archaeologists began to excavate them. It's said that some tombs were so heavily plundered that by the time archaeologists got to them, there was almost nothing left to find except broken pottery and empty coffins. Now, before you start imagining scenes from an Indiana Jones movie with ancient traps and curses coming to life, it's important to note that while these elements are certainly fun to think about, the real history of tomb robbing in ancient Egypt was more about survival than anything supernatural. Tomb robbers were often motivated by greed or desperation, wanting to gain access to the riches hidden inside the tombs. The idea of a curse, however, added an extra layer of intrigue and danger to the tombs. It's easy to understand why this legend persisted, given the countless treasures and the power that came with them. One thing is for sure. Whether the curse was real or not, the myths surrounding it only amplified the mystery of ancient Egypt. It turned these tombs into places of legend, and to this day, tourists, archaeologists, and mystics continue to be drawn to them, searching for answers. The legend of the curse serves as a reminder of how much people are willing to believe in the supernatural when faced with the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, it also taps into a primal fear of death, decay, and what lies beyond. Historians still argue whether the curse was a convenient narrative invented to explain a string of tragic events, or if it truly reflected the Egyptians' own fears about the sanctity of the afterlife. What's undeniable is that the stories of curses, death, and the supernatural are part of what keeps Egypt's history so alluring. The idea that disturbing a pharaoh's tomb could bring death and misfortune is a thought-provoking one, especially when you consider how much power these ancient rulers had and how fiercely they guarded their legacies. And let's not forget, the legacy of King Tut's tomb still holds an enduring fascination for people around the world. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was one of the greatest archaeological finds in history, revealing a wealth of treasures that gave us a glimpse into ancient Egyptian life. In fact, the treasures found in Tut's tomb were so rich and remarkable that they continue to inspire awe and curiosity about the world of the pharaohs. As we move on, remember that the mystery of Egypt is not just confined to its legends and curses. It's a land of incredible discoveries and hidden stories, stories that continue to unfold even as new tombs and artifacts are unearthed. Who knows what other secrets the sands of Egypt still have buried beneath them, waiting to be discovered. Shifting from curses to something far more intellectually intriguing, let's take a deep dive into one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Egyptian culture, hieroglyphics. You've seen them, right? Those beautiful, mysterious symbols etched onto temple walls and tombs, each one seemingly carrying a message from a time long past. But what exactly are these symbols, and why did the Egyptians choose to communicate in such an elaborate way? Hieroglyphics were not just a form of writing, they were a profound expression of Egyptian religious and cultural values. Used for everything from monumental inscriptions on tombs to religious texts, hieroglyphs were believed to have magical powers. The Egyptians believed that writing itself was a divine gift, granted by Thoth, the god of wisdom, and it was meant to preserve the names and deeds of the dead, ensuring their immortality. Hieroglyphics were the key to unlocking the afterlife, as tombs were inscribed with prayers and spells to guide the deceased into the next world. The idea was that by engraving these sacred words onto walls, the soul would be granted protection and guidance for its journey. But hieroglyphics were not just an art form, they were a highly complex system of symbols, combining logograms representing words and phonograms representing sounds. In fact, there were over 700 different symbols used in Egyptian hieroglyphs, each carrying its own unique meaning. Some of these symbols represented objects, like animals or plants, while others were more abstract, representing sounds or ideas. For instance, the symbol for water could look like a small squiggly line that resembled a wave, and the symbol for life was a looped ankh. When these symbols were strung together, they formed a message much like any modern alphabet or script. But unlike modern writing systems, Egyptian hieroglyphs were often written in columns or rows with no spaces between the words, and they could be read in any direction, left to right, right to left, or top to bottom. The direction the symbols faced also mattered, as the reader was supposed to start from the direction that the animals or people in the hieroglyphs were facing. One of the most fascinating aspects of hieroglyphs was their duality. While some hieroglyphs were used for sacred or ceremonial texts, others were used in day-to-day life, from trade records to administrative documents. This allowed hieroglyphs to serve both as a functional system of communication and a sacred language that connected the mortal world with the divine. But here's where it gets interesting. How did these ancient scribes master such a complex writing system? Was it purely for the elite? Was it something only priests, pharaohs, and scribes could use? Or did the common people know how to read and write in hieroglyphs too? Historians still argue about the accessibility of hieroglyphics. It's clear that only a select few were able to become scribes, as the education required to master this intricate writing system was time-consuming and complex. Becoming a scribe wasn't just about learning to write, it was also about understanding the religious and magical significance behind each symbol. For the pharaohs, it was crucial that their names and titles were carefully inscribed in hieroglyphs, often as part of elaborate rituals meant to guarantee their eternal place in history. Their names and deeds were engraved on monuments and temple walls, often as a way of showing their divine right to rule. This practice of engraving one's name in stone was intended to secure the ruler's immortality, essentially turning the pharaoh into a living legend whose name would be remembered for eternity. But here's the kicker. Despite all the effort to preserve these ancient symbols, hieroglyphics remained an enigma for centuries. For almost 1,500 years, no one could read them, and their true meaning was lost to time. That is, until one man, Jean-François Champollion, came along and cracked the code in the 19th century. Champollion, a French scholar, famously deciphered the Rosetta Stone, a key artifact that contained the same text written in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, a simplified form of hieroglyphs, and hieroglyphic. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 was a turning point for Egyptology, but it wasn't until Champollion's breakthrough that we truly began to understand the meaning behind the symbols. Thanks to his work, we now know that the Egyptians used hieroglyphs in a variety of ways, not just to tell stories, but to invoke magical powers, record history, and communicate with the divine. Historians still argue over how much we actually know about hieroglyphics today. While Champollion's decipherment opened the door to understanding these ancient texts, some scholars believe that there are still aspects of Egyptian writing that remain lost. Some of the symbols, particularly those found in more obscure tombs, continue to be a mystery. It's not just about decoding the symbols themselves, it's also about understanding the context in which they were used. Each symbol could have multiple meanings depending on its placement, and some texts may have been written with deliberate ambiguity. The true depth of the language may never be fully understood, and perhaps that's part of what makes it so enchanting. The thing about hieroglyphs that still fascinates us today is their connection to something much bigger than just communication. They were a link between the human and the divine, a tool used to ensure that the names and deeds of the dead would be preserved for eternity. Every carved symbol was a prayer. Every inscribed word was a plea for eternal life. They were more than just letters. They were an act of devotion. The ancient Egyptians saw their world in terms of cosmic order, and hieroglyphs were one of the ways they could bring that order to life. Whether they were etched into tomb walls, carved on stelae, or inscribed on papyrus scrolls, these symbols carried with them the weight of Egypt's legacy, a legacy that still holds power today. But even more than that, hieroglyphs are a reminder of how much we can learn from the past if we're willing to look deeply. When we read these ancient texts, we're not just reading the words of people who lived thousands of years ago. We're connecting with their hopes, their fears, their beliefs, and their dreams of immortality. They were a people who understood that words had power, that writing wasn't just a tool for communication, it was a way to transcend time. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of ancient Egypt, let's take a journey into the hauntingly captivating world of Egypt's most haunted sites. Egypt, with its ancient monuments, hidden tombs, and millennia-old history, has naturally become a fertile ground for ghost stories, supernatural phenomena, and chilling legends. While we often think of Egypt as a land of gods, pharaohs, and eternal monuments, it's also a place that's rich with eerie tales that blur the lines between reality and the supernatural. So, what makes these sites so haunted? Is it the weight of centuries of history, or do the restless spirits of the past still linger, guarding the secrets they left behind? One of the most famous haunted sites in Egypt is the Valley of the Kings. This sprawling necropolis in Luxor is home to the tombs of many of Egypt's most famous pharaohs, including Tutankhamun. The valley itself is often shrouded in mystery, both because of its archaeological importance and the eerie atmosphere that seems to permeate the area. The Valley of the Kings is a place of death and the afterlife, where the souls of the pharaohs were believed to embark on their final journey to the divine. But with so much death, it's no surprise that some claim that spirits still roam the valley today. Many believe that the spirit of King Tut in particular still haunts his tomb. It's said that anyone who disturbs the tomb of Tutankhamun, like those who opened it in 1922, will suffer misfortune, illness, or even death, an echo of the legendary curse of the pharaohs. While modern science has debunked many of the supernatural explanations surrounding these deaths, the fact remains that the eerie atmosphere of Tut's tomb still sends a chill down the spine of visitors. The idea of tombs filled with treasures, ancient rituals, and the powerful forces of the afterlife still stirs the imagination and creates. There's a feeling that something unexplainable, lurks in the shadows. Beyond the Valley of the Kings, there are other tombs and monuments scattered throughout Egypt that are said to be haunted. The Pyramid of Cheops, for instance, is another legendary site that is associated with strange occurrences. Visitors have reported hearing whispers, feeling a sudden drop in temperature, and even witnessing strange lights around the pyramid. Some believe that the spirits of the laborers who built the pyramid, or even the pharaohs who were entombed inside, still walk the halls of the great structure. These stories persist despite the passage of time, perpetuating the idea that Egypt's ancient monuments are more than just stone and sand. They're living, breathing pieces of history that continue to hold sway over the present. One of the most haunting tales comes from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, home to many priceless artifacts, including the treasures of Tutankhamun. It's rumored that some of the museum's exhibits, particularly those associated with the afterlife, are haunted by the spirits of the individuals they once belonged to. Some museum staff have reported feeling cold drafts, hearing footsteps echoing through empty rooms, and even encountering strange apparitions late at night. This has led to speculation that the spirits of ancient Egyptians, particularly those whose tombs were disturbed or whose mummies were removed from their resting places, might still be lingering in the museum. Historically, Egypt has always been a land of contrast, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The ancient Egyptians were deeply concerned with the afterlife, with their elaborate burial practices designed to ensure safe passage to the realm of the gods. This obsession with life after death and the rituals that surrounded it has only added to the mystique of the country. But with this focus on the afterlife came an acknowledgement of death as something that could not be easily avoided or understood. For the Egyptians, death was a continuation of life in another form, and they sought to maintain control over their spiritual journeys by surrounding themselves with protective rituals. But what if, just as they feared, death's influence could extend beyond the grave? Historians still debate the role of the supernatural in ancient Egyptian life. Was belief in ghosts, spirits, and the afterlife a necessary part of the culture, or was it a way to cope with the uncertainty of life and death? Ancient Egyptians believed that the soul had to pass a series of trials in the afterlife, where it would face judgment by Osiris, the god of the underworld. If the soul was deemed worthy, it could move on to the heavenly fields of Iaru. If not, it would be consumed by the monstrous Amit, ensuring that the soul would never live again. So, when it came to ensuring safety and protection, Egyptians often sought out spiritual guards, be it through charms, spells, or even the protective eyes of gods like Horus. While modern Egyptologists can explain away many of the eerie experiences at these sites, it's impossible to ignore the deep-rooted cultural significance of the supernatural in Egyptian society. The belief in spirits, ghosts, and curses served as a form of control over an otherwise uncertain existence. Whether you believe in the existence of these restless souls or not, there's no denying that Egypt's ancient sites have an aura of mysticism that's hard to ignore. And it's not just the monuments or tombs that are steeped in haunting tales. Modern-day Egypt is no stranger to ghostly reports. Tourists who visit these ancient sites are often struck by a sense of unease, a sense that they are being watched by invisible forces. Perhaps it's the weight of history or the powerful connection the Egyptians had with the divine, but many visitors report having strange, unexplainable experiences, whether it's an odd feeling of being followed, an overwhelming sense of dread, or just a sense that the past is much closer than we think. As we venture deeper into Egypt's most haunted sites, it becomes clear that the mysteries of the ancient world are not easily put to rest. Whether it's the unsettling feeling of stepping into a pharaoh's tomb or the eerie whispers around the pyramids of Giza, these ancient places continue to hold a power that lingers long after the people who built them are gone. The ghosts of Egypt's past may not always be seen, but they are certainly felt, and their presence keeps the allure of ancient Egypt alive to this day. Now that we've ventured through Egypt's haunted sites, let's dive into a more profound and timeless aspect of their belief system, the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, it was merely a transition, a journey that required preparation, rituals, and a belief in divine intervention. While most cultures focus on life and the present moment, the Egyptians poured immense energy into ensuring that their souls would have a safe passage into eternity. It wasn't just about what happened after death, it was about the preparation for this journey, the steps they took during their lifetime, and the rituals that were supposed to guide them through the unknown. The first crucial step in the Egyptian journey to the afterlife was death itself, but death wasn't just about the body ceasing to function, it was about the separation of the physical and spiritual worlds. The Egyptians believed that the soul had several components, the ka, the ba, and the ak. The ka represented the life force or the essence of the person, which remained tied to the body after death. The ba, often depicted as a bird with a human head, was the personality or the unique qualities of the individual, and the Akish was the form that would ascend to the afterlife after passing through a series of trials. The ultimate goal of the deceased was to achieve immortality, which meant passing through the duat, or the underworld, and emerging victorious on the other side to join the gods in paradise. But getting there wasn't easy. Along the way, the soul would face many challenges, including the famous weighing of the heart ritual, which would determine whether or not the soul was worthy of entering the afterlife. This judgment was presided over by Osiris, the god of the underworld, and the scale that weighed the heart against Ma'at's feather of truth was the pivotal moment of the journey. If the heart was light enough, free of sin and guilt, the soul would be allowed to continue its journey. But if the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it would be devoured by the terrifying monster Amit, and the soul would be lost forever. The weighing of the heart is one of the most iconic scenes from Egyptian mythology, representing the central theme of justice, truth, and balance in their belief system. To ensure a smooth passage to the afterlife, Egyptians performed countless rituals, such as the opening of the mouth, which was a ceremony intended to revive the deceased's senses and allow them to interact with the gods in the afterlife. The opening of the mouth was an essential part of mummification, with priests performing elaborate prayers and ceremonies to ensure that the deceased could eat, drink, speak, and receive offerings from their loved ones in the next world. Historians still debate how much Egyptians truly believed in the literal nature of their afterlife journey. Was it an elaborate myth designed to provide comfort and structure to their understanding of death, or did they genuinely believe that their souls would face these trials? Many Egyptologists argue that the afterlife was as real to the Egyptians as the world they lived in, a tangible place where souls could reside forever if they were worthy. But perhaps in a way, it was more than just a literal belief. It was a way of framing life and death in terms of cosmic balance, morality, and order. The Egyptians believed that maintaining balance in the world, both in life and after death, was essential to their society's survival. Now, let's talk about the tomb, the sacred space where the soul would begin its journey to the afterlife. Tombs in ancient Egypt were not just burial places, they were gateways to eternity. The grand tombs of the pharaohs, like those in the Valley of the Kings, were filled with treasures, food, clothing, and everything a pharaoh might need in the afterlife. The tomb itself was seen as the house of the deceased's spirit, and it was protected by magical inscriptions, rituals, and even curses, all designed to prevent tomb robbers from disturbing the resting place and threatening the soul's journey. The tombs were often decorated with scenes of daily life, gods, and rituals, all meant to ensure the deceased's comfort and safety in the afterlife. But not all tombs were as elaborate as those of the pharaohs. Ordinary Egyptians, too, had their own versions of the afterlife, with simpler tombs and burial practices. While they didn't have the vast riches of the pharaohs, they still believed that proper burial and offerings could help their souls travel safely to the afterlife. Even the poorest Egyptians could find solace in the idea that their spirit would live on in the presence of the gods. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian burial customs was the inclusion of texts like the Book of the Dead. This collection of spells, prayers, and instructions was meant to guide the soul through the dangerous and unpredictable journey in the afterlife. These texts were often placed in the tomb alongside the deceased, acting as a spiritual roadmap that would help them navigate the challenges of the duat. The Book of the Dead was a tool for immortality, offering knowledge of what to say and do when encountering deities, monsters, and other obstacles. The spells contained within it provided the soul with protection, ensuring that it could reach the land of the gods without being consumed by the dangers that lay ahead. Historians still argue about the true nature of the Book of the Dead. Was it meant to be used by the general public, or was it a privilege reserved for the elite? Some suggest that the texts were meant to empower all Egyptians, giving them a fighting chance in the afterlife, while others believe that the knowledge contained within the book was only available to the wealthier classes who could afford to have these texts inscribed on papyrus or stelae. Regardless, the Book of the Dead remains one of the most important texts in Egyptian history, a window into the spiritual practices and beliefs of a civilization that sought not only immortality but also a moral code that guided its people both in life and death. In the end, the Egyptians' obsession with the afterlife was more than just about immortality. It was about maintaining cosmic order and ensuring that the world, both physical and spiritual, remained balanced. The afterlife wasn't just an extension of life, it was a continuation of the values, ethics, and principles that governed their world. In a society where the gods and the afterlife were ever present, there was no separation between the earthly realm and the divine. Life and death were intertwined in a cosmic dance, and the journey to the afterlife was the ultimate test of one's integrity and alignment with divine law. As we continue our exploration of Egypt's rich tapestry of beliefs and practices, let's take a look at one of the most fascinating and secretive aspects of ancient Egyptian society, its hidden treasures. The ancient Egyptians were not just obsessed with the afterlife. They were also equally consumed with accumulating wealth and precious items to ensure their comfort in the next world. But what really makes Egyptian treasure hunting so intriguing is not just the jewels, gold, and other riches, it's the mystery surrounding lost treasures that have yet to be discovered. One of the most famous and still mysterious treasures lies in the Valley of the Kings. While many tombs, including that of King Tutankhamun, have been discovered and excavated, some scholars and treasure hunters believe that there are still hidden chambers and treasures waiting to be uncovered. The tomb of Tutankhamun itself, for instance, was filled with countless treasures, but it was missing some items that many believe were meant to accompany him in the afterlife. There are rumors that these missing treasures were looted by grave robbers before the tomb was sealed, but others believe that they may still be hidden somewhere deep within the tomb complex or in undiscovered chambers nearby. It's a tantalizing idea, especially when you consider how much treasure was initially found and how much more could be waiting, lost to time. Another captivating piece of the puzzle is the legendary lost tomb of Queen Nefertiti, one of Egypt's most famous queens. While her tomb has never been conclusively found, some archaeologists believe that she may have been buried alongside Pharaoh Akhenaten in a tomb that has yet to be discovered. Theories have circulated that Nefertiti's tomb could be hidden behind a false wall in the tomb of Tutankhamun, or possibly in an undiscovered part of the Valley of the Kings. The mystery surrounding her final resting place has only deepened over the years, and the treasure that might lie hidden with her remains a tantalizing dream for archaeologists and treasure hunters alike. While Egypt's elite rulers and pharaohs amassed staggering fortunes, it wasn't just the royalty who sought riches. Even everyday Egyptians believed that they needed to secure wealth for the afterlife. Ordinary citizens, while they couldn't afford grand tombs or priceless treasures, still buried their dead with offerings that included food, figurines, and small valuables. This belief in securing the deceased's comfort and prosperity in the afterlife meant that even humble tombs could house significant treasures, many of which have been looted over the centuries by tomb robbers looking to cash in on Egypt's buried wealth. Some of these treasures were more than just gold or silver. They were often finely crafted, highly detailed objects meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife. Elaborate jewelry, intricately painted pottery, and finely woven textiles. These were all part of the burial rituals. Such treasures weren't just about wealth. They were symbols of status and importance, tools to ensure that the soul had everything it needed to live on in the next world. In fact, the fine craftsmanship of these items is one of the reasons why many of them still survive today, giving us a glimpse into the artistic mastery of ancient Egypt. But while we can admire the treasures that have survived, there's also something haunting about the ones that have been lost to history. In a way, the search for Egypt's missing treasures is as much about the thrill of discovery as it is about the stories they carry. Imagine uncovering a forgotten chest of jewels that once belonged to a forgotten pharaoh, or opening a sealed room to find it filled with offerings meant for the gods. The idea that much still remains undiscovered adds an element of excitement to Egyptology. It's as if Egypt's history is still unfolding, and its secrets are still waiting to be uncovered. Historians still debate whether the ancient Egyptians were the wealthiest civilization of their time, or if their treasures simply seem more significant due to their cultural impact. Some argue that the sheer volume of their gold and treasures, often hoarded in monumental tombs, is a reflection of their belief in immortality and their desire to preserve their wealth and status for eternity. Others suggest that the Egyptians' wealth was more symbolic, shaped by the grandeur of their temples and the art that filled their tombs, serving as a testament to their cultural and religious values rather than just material opulence. Regardless of how we view their treasures, the fact remains that Egypt's wealth has been a source of fascination for millennia. From the glittering jewels of the pharaohs to the intricate goldwork in Tutankhamun's tomb, the treasures of ancient Egypt continue to captivate us. Some treasures have been lost, some have been plundered, but many remain preserved in the very tombs and monuments that were built to safeguard them. The search for these treasures is not just about uncovering gold. It's about connecting with the ancient people who created them, understanding their beliefs, and unraveling the mysteries that remain. And it's not just physical treasures that continue to captivate the imagination. The knowledge that the Egyptians left behind, what they knew about the heavens, their art, their science, remains just as precious. The Egyptians were brilliant astronomers, mathematicians, and architects, and their discoveries still shape the way we think about the world today. The pyramids, the temples, and the art that adorns their tombs are not just relics of the past. They are testaments to an advanced civilization that had a profound understanding of the world around them. What is it about these treasures and tombs that has captured the world's attention? Maybe it's the mystery that surrounds them, the idea that so much wealth and knowledge could be lost for centuries, only to be rediscovered by adventurers, scholars, and archaeologists. Or maybe it's the stories that these treasures tell, the lives of powerful kings and queens, the rituals that bound their people together, and the intricate relationship they had with their gods. Whatever the reason, Egypt's treasures, both lost and found, remain a central part of the allure that keeps us coming back to its ancient past. Now let's turn our attention to another fascinating but often overlooked aspect of ancient Egyptian society, its complex pantheon of gods and goddesses. The Egyptians were a deeply religious people, and their beliefs were reflected in every aspect of their lives, from the way they built their tombs to the rituals they performed at home. Their gods were not distant, unattainable figures. Instead, they were deeply embedded in everyday life, often represented as part human, part animal, and often possessing both divine and destructive powers. The gods were an essential part of Egyptian culture, guiding everything from the seasons to human morality and offering protection, fertility, and justice in their own unique ways. At the very top of this divine hierarchy was Ra, the sun god, who was considered the ruler of the gods. Ra's journey across the sky in his solar boat symbolized the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. He was the creator of the universe and the ultimate source of life and power. But Ra wasn't the only god with dominion over certain aspects of life. Egypt's gods and goddesses were incredibly specialized, each watching over different realms of existence. Take Osiris, for instance. As the god of the afterlife, Osiris represented both death and rebirth. He was the ruler of the underworld, the one who judged souls and guided them on their journey to the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that death wasn't the end. It was a transition into another realm where the soul could live on forever. Osiris was intimately tied to the annual flooding of the Nile, which brought life to the land. The flood was seen as a symbol of Osiris's death and resurrection. When the waters receded, they left behind fertile soil, just as Osiris's death was followed by the rebirth of the land. Then there's Isis, Osiris's wife and sister, and one of the most important and powerful goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. She was the goddess of magic, motherhood, and fertility, but also a protector of the dead. Isis was often depicted as a woman with a throne-shaped crown on her head, and she was associated with both the home and the afterlife. Her influence was so great that she was worshipped beyond Egypt's borders and became a central figure in many other cultures, even reaching Greece and Rome. She was the one who used her magic to bring Osiris back to life after he was killed by his brother Set, and her power as a healer and protector of the dead made her one of the most revered deities in Egyptian religion. Speaking of Set, we can't talk about Egyptian gods without mentioning him. Set, the god of chaos, disorder, and destruction, was one of the most complex and controversial figures in the Egyptian pantheon. While he was associated with negative aspects like violence and confusion, he also played an important role in maintaining cosmic balance. Set was the one who fought the chaos of the universe, but in doing so, he often had to create turmoil in the process. His rivalry with his brother Osiris and his role in the myth of Osiris's death are central to many of Egypt's most dramatic stories. Set's story highlights the Egyptian belief that life and death, order and chaos, were two sides of the same coin, and both were necessary for the universe to function. But not all gods in Egypt were associated with large-scale cosmic battles. Some, like Bastet, the lioness-headed goddess of home and fertility, were much more closely tied to daily life. Bastet was also the goddess of protection and was often invoked by women during childbirth or for protection of their homes. Cats were sacred to her, and her connection to feline creatures is one of the reasons why cats were so revered in Egyptian culture. The gentle, nurturing aspects of Bastet were a reflection of the balance the Egyptians sought between the violent forces of chaos and the protective, life-giving forces of creation. Historians still argue about the true significance of each god's role. Were they meant to represent real forces in nature, or were they symbolic of the human experience? Some believe the gods were personifications of the natural world, while others argue that they represented psychological and moral concepts. One thing is certain: Egyptians saw the gods as deeply intertwined with the world around them, and their gods were everywhere, from sky to the river to the very stones of the temples. The importance of the gods extended beyond the spiritual. Their divine power was embedded in the very fabric of Egyptian society. The pharaohs, for example, were considered living gods, incarnations of the divine on earth. The idea that the pharaoh was both a god and a king was central to Egyptian governance, and it helped ensure that the pharaoh had both religious and political authority. The pharaoh's role was to mediate between the gods and the people, ensuring that divine order was maintained in both the mortal world and the afterlife. It's easy to see why the death of a pharaoh was considered such a cataclysmic event. When a ruler died, the living world seemed to lose its direct connection to the divine. But not all gods were as revered as Ra or Osiris. Some were Re-like domestic deities invoked in everyday rituals. One such example is Taweret, the goddess of childbirth and fertility. She was depicted as a hippopotamus with the limbs of a lion and the tail of a crocodile. An odd combination, but one that reflected her role as a protector of pregnant women and newborns. Taweret was meant to be a guardian of life, ensuring the safety of both mother and child, and her image was often placed in homes or carried as a charm to ward off evil spirits. In addition to the gods, the Egyptians had a number of divine creatures and spirit beings that were believed to offer protection and aid in the afterlife. These included creatures like the Bennu, a mythical bird that represented resurrection, and the scarab beetle, which was seen as a symbol of regeneration and transformation. The scarab was often placed in tombs as an amulet, representing the idea that the deceased would be reborn into the afterlife just as a beetle emerges from its cocoon. This connection between life, death, and rebirth was a fundamental aspect of Egyptian spirituality, and the gods were the guardians of this eternal cycle. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians truly saw their gods as tangible forces or whether they were part of a symbolic framework meant to explain the mysteries of life. But what is clear is that these gods were not just abstract ideas, they were central to every aspect of Egyptian life, from the architecture of their temples to the smallest amulets carried by individuals. The gods helped explain the natural world, the cycles of the seasons, and even the moral code that governed human behavior. As we move forward in our exploration of Egypt, it's important to remember that these gods were far more than just figures in ancient myths. They were representations of the forces of nature, the universe, and human emotion. The Egyptians didn't just believe in gods, they lived with them. The gods were present in everything they did, guiding their actions, shaping their beliefs, and helping them navigate the complexities of both life and death. As we continue our journey into the heart of ancient Egyptian culture, let's take a closer look at the highly complex and mysterious field of Egyptian medicine. While we often associate ancient Egypt with their grand architecture, complex deities, and pyramids, their medical practices were nothing short of remarkable for their time. Ancient Egyptians were among the earliest people to begin formalizing healthcare, and their medical knowledge, surprisingly advanced for its era, is still a subject of fascination. Medical practices in ancient Egypt were a blend of practical treatments, spiritual beliefs, and an understanding of the human body that was far ahead of many other ancient civilizations. In fact, some of the medical practices and tools used by Egyptian physicians were so advanced that they would influence medical science for centuries to come. But just as with their gods and afterlife beliefs, Egyptian medicine was deeply entwined with spirituality. Disease and illness were often seen not as random events, but as a manifestation of supernatural forces or divine retribution. In this way, healing was as much about restoring spiritual balance as it was about addressing physical ailments. The ancient Egyptians had an intricate understanding of the human body, thanks in part to their extensive knowledge of anatomy. While they didn't have the advanced tools we have today, they were able to make remarkable discoveries through the process of mummification. The careful preservation of the body allowed them to study organs, muscles, and bones in ways that most other ancient civilizations could not. The fact that many Egyptian physicians were able to perform surgeries and successfully treat wounds using methods and techniques that wouldn't be seen again for centuries is a testament to their sophisticated medical knowledge. One of the most famous Egyptian medical texts is the Ebers Papyrus, a vast compilation of medical knowledge that dates back to around 1500 BCE. This document includes information on hundreds of diseases, injuries, and treatments, and it reveals an understanding of anatomy and medicine that was far ahead of its time. For instance, the Ebers Papyrus contains detailed descriptions of diseases such as tuberculosis, diabetes, and even heart disease. conditions that ancient Egyptians had no modern concept of but still managed to identify and treat with some degree of success. The Egyptians also developed a variety of medicinal treatments using plants and herbs, many of which are still used in modern medicine. For example, they used the aloe vera plant for its healing properties, applying it to wounds and burns, and they used myrrh and frankincense as both medicinal and ritualistic substances. Other herbs, such as garlic and cumin, were believed to have powerful healing properties and were commonly used in treatments for everything from digestive issues to infections. Historians still argue over the balance between Egyptian medicine's empirical knowledge and the spiritual beliefs that accompanied it. Was the use of herbs and plants based on trial and error, or did the Egyptians understand the scientific principles behind the treatments? And to what extent were the healing practices influenced by the religious beliefs of the time? The Egyptians believed that illness was often caused by spiritual imbalance or the wrath of the gods. So healing wasn't just about removing physical symptoms, it was about restoring harmony between the body and the divine. This made Egyptian medicine both an art and a spiritual practice, as healers and priests worked together to create a treatment plan that addressed both the physical and the metaphysical aspects of disease. The role of the physician in ancient Egypt was highly respected, and many medical practitioners were trained at the temples, where they studied under the guidance of the gods, particularly Imhotep, the god of medicine and healing. Imhotep was originally a mortal, a skilled architect and healer, but after his death he was deified due to his incredible contributions to Egyptian medicine. He was believed to be the patron god of doctors and scribes, and his name was invoked by physicians before treating patients. His legacy was so powerful that even centuries after his time, Egyptian healers still looked to him as a guiding figure in their medical practices. Beyond physical healing, Egyptian doctors also had a strong understanding of mental health. While the ancient Egyptians didn't have a term for mental illness as we do today, they certainly recognized psychological issues. Conditions like depression, anxiety, and even certain forms of psychosis were understood in terms of spiritual imbalance. Treatments for mental health often involved religious rituals, prayers, and offerings to the gods, but they also used herbal remedies, relaxation techniques, and music to calm the mind. Music, in particular, played a role in healing, with certain sounds believed to have a soothing effect on both body and soul. As sophisticated as Egyptian medicine was, it wasn't without its limits. Surgery, though practiced, was often rudimentary by modern standards. Surgical tools from ancient Egypt, such as scalpels made from flint and bronze, have been uncovered in archaeological digs. They were used in procedures ranging from simple wound stitching to more complex operations like trepanation, where a hole was drilled into the skull to treat head injuries. The success rates of these surgeries are unknown, but the fact that such procedures were attempted at all shows an advanced level of medical understanding. But here's where it gets interesting. Egyptian medicine wasn't just about physical health, it was about the body and soul being in harmony. The Egyptians didn't view health as merely the absence of disease. They saw it as the balance of all things, physical, spiritual, and environmental. This belief extended to their treatments, which often involved prayer, amulets, and rituals performed by priests alongside medical care. It's easy to see how this mixture of spiritual and physical healing would have made Egyptians feel both comforted and empowered. They had the knowledge to heal the body, but they also had the power of divine protection behind their healing practices. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians understood medicine in a truly scientific sense or whether their practices were based more on superstition and faith. One thing is clear, though, their medical knowledge was deeply tied to their religion, and their healers were not just doctors. They were also spiritual guides. The Egyptians knew that healing was a holistic process, one that involved more than just the physical body. It was about restoring balance, both within the person and with the divine forces that controlled the universe. This holistic view of medicine was revolutionary in its time and continues to be an influence in many modern healing practices today. As we move from the realm of medicine into another key aspect of Egyptian culture, let's talk about one of the most mysterious and enduring figures in Egyptian mythology, the Great Sphinx. This monumental statue, with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, has long captured the imagination of historians, tourists, and mystics alike. Located on the Giza Plateau near the pyramids, the Sphinx has stood for thousands of years as a symbol of ancient Egyptian power, wisdom, and mystery. But what do we really know about this enigmatic structure? The Sphinx is often considered a guardian of the Giza pyramids, symbolizing the strength, courage, and majesty of the pharaohs. The lion's body represents the power and ferocity of the animal kingdom, while the human head, which is believed to represent Pharaoh Khafra, signifies the intellectual and spiritual power of the ruler. It's the perfect fusion of animal and human attributes, which was common in Egyptian iconography, reflecting the belief that rulers were divine beings capable of transcending the mortal realm. The exact purpose of the Sphinx, however, remains a topic of debate among scholars. Some believe it was a symbol of the pharaoh's power, designed to guard the pyramids and the tombs of Egypt's rulers. Others suggest it may have had a more cosmic or spiritual function, possibly linked to the sun god Ra. The position of the Sphinx, facing directly east, aligns with the sunrise, suggesting that it may have been tied to the ancient Egyptian solar beliefs, marking the beginning of a new day, a symbol of rebirth and renewal. But the Sphinx is not just a majestic statue, it is also a mystery in itself. For centuries, the Sphinx has been shrouded in legends, and its origins have been lost to time. One of the most debated topics surrounding the Sphinx is its age. According to traditional Egyptology, the Sphinx was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, around 2500 BCE, who is believed to have commissioned its construction as a monument to himself. However, some alternative theories suggest that the Sphinx could be far older, possibly dating back to a time before the construction of the pyramids. Some researchers believe the Sphinx could be as old as 10,000 years, based on weathering patterns observed on its surface, particularly erosion that seems to have been caused by water. If true, this would suggest that the Sphinx predates the dynastic pharaohs by several millennia, pushing back the origins of Egyptian civilization far earlier than we currently believe. Historians and archaeologists continue to debate the origins of the Sphinx, with some even proposing that it may not represent Khafre at all, but perhaps another pharaoh, or even an entirely different ruler. There are theories that the Sphinx could represent a much older figure, perhaps even a symbol of the gods. In fact, some scholars argue that the original face of the Sphinx may not have been that of a pharaoh at all, but rather a lion or some other divine animal, later altered by subsequent rulers to resemble Khafra. The mysteries of the Sphinx continue to unfold, and we're still far from a definitive answer on its true purpose or age. The Sphinx has also become synonymous with a number of supernatural and mysterious tales. Throughout history, it has been tied to prophecies, riddles, and legends of hidden knowledge. In ancient Greek mythology, the Sphinx was famously associated with the legend of Oedipus. In this myth, the Sphinx terrorized the city of Thebes by asking travelers a riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Anyone who failed to answer correctly was devoured by the creature. Oedipus, of course, answered the riddle correctly, breaking the curse and causing the Sphinx to throw herself into the sea. The riddle itself has fascinated people for centuries, and while the Egyptian Sphinx isn't tied directly to the Greek myth, the idea of the Sphinx as a figure of hidden knowledge and challenges remains a central theme. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Sphinx is the belief that it may hide a vast treasure or secret beneath it. Some theorists claim that the Sphinx could be guarding an ancient library or vault filled with lost knowledge, while others suggest that there could be chambers beneath the Sphinx that have yet to be explored. In the early 20th century, there were even reports of secret passages being discovered beneath the Sphinx's paws, but these findings have never been fully verified. If there are hidden chambers or treasures beneath the Sphinx, they could offer us a deeper understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization and its secrets. In addition to these mysterious theories, there are also more practical questions surrounding the Sphinx's construction. How did the ancient Egyptians manage to carve such an enormous statue out of a single block of limestone with no modern tools? The Sphinx's proportions are astounding, measuring about 240 feet in length and 66 feet in height, and its construction would have required an immense amount of skill and labor. While it is generally accepted that the Sphinx was carved directly from the natural bedrock of the Giza Plateau, the techniques used by the Egyptians to create this monument remain a source of wonder. Some have even suggested that the Sphinx's construction may have involved advanced lost technologies or methods that were later forgotten, further adding to the aura of mystery surrounding the monument. Despite centuries of research and exploration, the Sphinx continues to hold its secrets. Even today, visitors who approach it cannot help but feel a sense of awe and reverence as they stand before this ancient symbol of Egypt's grandeur. It's a timeless figure that transcends the boundaries of history and myth, one that continues to captivate the imagination of all who encounter it. Whether it is a symbol of a great king, a divine protector, or a secret guardian of lost knowledge, the Sphinx will undoubtedly remain one of the world's greatest mysteries, a monument that seems to hold the key to unlocking many of Egypt's deepest secrets. Historians still debate the true purpose of the Sphinx, its age, and its symbolism. What is clear is that the Great Sphinx of Giza stands as one of the most enigmatic and iconic symbols of ancient Egypt, continuing to fascinate people around the world with its mystery and grandeur. Let's take a moment to explore one of the most intriguing and often overlooked aspects of ancient Egyptian society, their obsession with immortality. From the pharaohs to commoners, the desire to achieve eternal life was at the heart of Egyptian culture. This fixation wasn't just about avoiding death, it was about continuing to live forever, in a different form, in the company of the gods. But how did they go about achieving such an ambitious goal, and what did immortality mean to them? The Egyptians believed that death was not the end, but merely a transition from one realm to another. The afterlife was a continuation of life, but it was a life that required preparation, rituals, and offerings to ensure that one could pass through the perilous journey to the land of the gods. The ancient Egyptians were not just concerned with physical death. They were deeply worried about the preservation of their soul and their ability to maintain their identity after death. To achieve immortality, they needed to ensure that the soul, or the ka, remained intact and was properly provided for. The process of achieving immortality began long before death itself. During their lives, Egyptians prepared for the afterlife by living virtuously, following religious rituals and accruing wealth and possessions that could accompany them into the next world. The wealthy had elaborate tombs built, filled with treasures, food, and items they would need in the afterlife. But it wasn't just about material wealth. The Egyptians placed great importance on moral conduct. To pass into the afterlife, one had to be judged by Osiris, the god of the underworld, and face the weighing of the heart, where the soul would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was light and free of wrongdoing, the soul was deemed worthy and could continue its journey into the afterlife. However, if the heart was heavy with guilt, it would be devoured by Amit, a demoness who prevented the soul from passing on. This process of judgment was not just about ensuring a peaceful afterlife. It was a moral test emphasizing the importance of living a just and virtuous life. But what if you weren't a pharaoh, or someone who could afford an elaborate tomb and the services of priests to perform these rites? Well, even for ordinary Egyptians, immortality was still attainable, though through slightly different means. The less wealthy didn't have access to grand monuments or treasures, but they still believed in the power of burial rituals and the Book of the Dead, a text full of spells, prayers, and instructions for navigating the afterlife. This book, placed in the tombs of the deceased, was like a guidebook for the soul, ensuring that it would find its way through the dangerous realms of the afterlife and into the presence of the gods. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian beliefs about immortality was their idea of the Bey, the personality or essence of a person. The Ba was thought to be able to travel freely between the worlds of the living and the dead. It could leave the tomb to visit family members or interact with the living, but it always needed the protection and sustenance provided by the tomb's offerings. The Ka and the Ba were two parts of the soul that had to be carefully maintained, and that's why the preservation of the body was so important. The body, through the process of mummification, was meant to serve as a vessel for the soul, allowing it to return to the physical world if necessary. Mummification, with its elaborate processes and rituals, was at the heart of the Egyptian quest for immortality. The body was preserved to ensure that the Ka would have a place to return to, but the true purpose of the mummification process was to keep the individual's identity intact. Without proper preservation, the soul could not recognize the body or return to it, thus risking the loss of identity and the failure to achieve immortality. The intricate care given to the preservation of the body was a direct reflection of the Egyptians' deep desire to ensure their continued existence in the afterlife. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians believed in immortality in the literal sense, or whether it was more of a symbolic representation of their desire for lasting influence. Were they obsessed with the idea of an afterlife because they genuinely believed they could continue to live forever, or was it a way to deal with the inevitability of death? Some scholars argue that the Egyptian concept of immortality was more spiritual than physical, emphasizing a legacy of deeds, teachings, and connections that would transcend death. Others point out that the sheer level of effort and resources spent on tombs, mummification, and burial rituals indicates a strong belief in physical immortality, an eternal life that could be sustained through rituals, preservation, and divine favor. But what really makes the Egyptians' quest for immortality stand out is the sense of continuity it provided. For the Egyptians, immortality wasn't just about living forever in some abstract spiritual sense. It was about ensuring that one's name, deeds, and identity would remain intact for eternity. Pharaohs had monuments and tombs built in their honor to ensure that their legacy would survive long after their physical bodies decayed. Temples, statues, and inscriptions were all part of the effort to immortalize their reigns and actions. For common people too, the preservation of their names and deeds in the form of inscriptions and offerings was an important part of ensuring their place in history. Perhaps one of the most telling examples of the Egyptians' obsession with immortality is the grand scale of their burial practices. The construction of massive tombs, like the pyramids, required thousands of workers, vast resources, and years of labor. These monumental structures were not just tombs, they were symbols of eternal life. The sheer scale of the pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza, speaks to the Egyptians' desire to leave something permanent behind, something that would outlast their mortal lives and stand as a testament to their greatness. As we continue to uncover more about ancient Egypt, we realize that their desire for immortality wasn't just about fear of death. It was about achieving a kind of permanence that transcended the physical world. The Egyptians sought to maintain a connection to the divine, to live forever among the gods, and to ensure that their souls would never fade away. Their obsession with immortality wasn't just a way to deal with death. It was an integral part of their worldview, a belief that life, death, and the afterlife were all interconnected in a divine cycle that could continue forever, if only they took the proper steps to ensure it. Let's now explore a central feature of Egyptian society that shaped not just their spiritual beliefs but their very survival, the Nile River. The Nile wasn't just a source of water for the Egyptians, it was the lifeblood of the entire civilization. This mighty river shaped every aspect of Egyptian life, from agriculture to religion, and it provided the Egyptians with the resources to build their incredible monuments and thriving cities. Without the Nile, there would have been no Egypt as we know it. The ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile was a gift from the gods, especially the god Hapi, the god of the inundation. Every year the Nile would flood its banks, and this flooding was seen as a divine blessing. The floodwaters carried with them nutrient-rich silt from the mountains of Ethiopia, which replenished the soil and made it incredibly fertile. This annual flooding cycle allowed the Egyptians to grow crops in an otherwise arid landscape, and it was the foundation of their agricultural system. Wheat, barley and flax were staple crops, and the surplus from these crops allowed Egypt to flourish. The importance of the Nile was so great that it became the heart of Egyptian religion. The river was thought to be the earthly counterpart to the primordial waters from which the world was created. The Egyptians believed that the Nile's annual flooding was a manifestation of the tears of Isis mourning her dead husband Osiris. This myth was tied to the idea of renewal, resurrection, and the cyclical nature of life and death, themes that permeated Egyptian culture. The flooding of the Nile represented a time of rebirth, just as the pharaohs' rule represented the restoration of cosmic order. But the Nile wasn't just important for its role in agriculture, it was also the main transportation route in Egypt. The river served as the primary means of moving people, goods, and materials between Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. The flow of the river was so reliable that the Egyptians built their cities, temples, and monuments along its banks. The Nile provided access to the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, facilitating trade with other cultures in Africa and the Mediterranean. It was through this trade network that Egypt acquired valuable resources such as cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Nubia, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. The Egyptians were well aware of the importance of the Nile and developed a deep connection to it. They used the river not just for practical purposes, but for symbolic ones as well. The river's flow from south to north was thought to represent the path of life, ever moving, ever changing. The Nile was also seen as a divine force, with sacred rituals performed to honor it. The Feast of the Inundation was one of the most important religious festivals in Egypt, where the people celebrated the river's flood, acknowledging its life-giving properties. Temples along the Nile were built to honor gods associated with water, fertility, and agriculture, such as Hapi and Khnum, the god of the Nile's source. Historians still debate how much the ancient Egyptians understood about the true origins of the Nile. While they had a deep reverence for the river and its importance in their lives, they didn't have the scientific knowledge to explain where the river's waters came from. The source of the Nile was one of the greatest geographical mysteries of the ancient world, and it wasn't until the 19th century that explorers like John Hanning Speke identified the lake regions of East Africa as the source of the river. Yet the Egyptians never fully solved the mystery of the Nile's origin, and this only added to the mystical allure of the river in their minds. The role of the Nile in Egyptian culture is evident not only in their religious practices but in their monumental construction projects. The great temples and tombs that we associate with Egypt today were often constructed along the banks of the Nile. Temples dedicated to gods like Ra, Osiris, and Amun were aligned with the cardinal points, but the Nile also played a significant role in their locations. For instance, the great temple of Karnak, which was dedicated to the god Amun, is situated just east of the Nile River, with its main entrance facing the river, symbolizing the flow of divine power into the heart of Egypt. The relationship between the Egyptians and the Nile was so sacred that they believed it was through the river that the pharaohs maintained cosmic order. The pharaoh was considered the living Horus, the divine ruler who ensured that the Nile flooded at the right time and that the land remained fertile and prosperous. The Egyptians believed that their pharaohs had the divine responsibility to ensure the smooth flow of the river, and that his reign would determine the success of their crops, their people, and their nation. If the pharaohs failed in their duties, it was believed that the Nile would no longer flood properly, resulting in famine and chaos. The Nile also played a key role in Egypt's view of the afterlife. The river was seen as a conduit for the soul's journey to the afterlife. The journey of the deceased was believed to mirror the flow of the river, moving from the world of the living to the realm of the dead, with all of its trials and challenges. The Egyptians believed that in the afterlife they would need to cross the Nile in order to reach the underworld and be judged by Osiris. The river's role in both life and death was fundamental to Egyptian cosmology. And yet, despite the reverence and dependence on the Nile, it wasn't always a reliable source of life. During times of drought or when the flooding failed, the Egyptians faced hardship. These periods were seen as a breakdown of divine order, and the pharaoh would often conduct special rituals to appease the gods and restore balance. This connection between the health of the river and the stability of Egyptian society underscores just how deeply intertwined the Nile was with Egypt's identity. Historians still debate the degree to which the Nile shaped Egypt's unique culture and civilization. Was it purely a resource that facilitated the rise of one of the world's greatest empires? Or was it something far deeper, a symbol of life, death, and the divine? What is clear is that the Nile was not just a river to the Egyptians, it was a life force that shaped their history, their spirituality, and their very existence. As we continue our journey through the complexities of ancient Egypt, let's now explore one of the lesser discussed yet absolutely fascinating aspects of Egyptian society, their approach to sex, love, and fertility. The Egyptians had a unique and often surprisingly liberal view of sexuality, which was intimately linked to their understanding of life, death, and the gods. Love and fertility weren't just private matters, they were intertwined with the forces of nature and were celebrated as divine principles that maintained cosmic order. First, let's start with fertility, which was one of the most significant aspects of Egyptian life. The Egyptians believed that fertility was essential for both the physical and spiritual continuity of life. This belief was reflected in their gods and goddesses, many of whom were linked to the processes of creation, growth, and reproduction. One of the most important deities associated with fertility was Hathor, the goddess of love, motherhood, and joy. She was often depicted as a cow or as a woman with cow horns, symbolizing the nurturing and life-giving aspects of femininity. Hathor was also closely associated with sexuality, and her festivals were marked by celebrations of music, dance, and revelry. In a society where fertility was crucial to survival, Hathor was considered one of the most important deities, worshipped by both the common people and the elites. Another key fertility goddess was Isis, who, as the wife and sister of Osiris, represented not just motherhood, but also the cycle of life and death. After Osiris was murdered by his brother Set, it was Isis who brought him back to life, symbolizing the eternal nature of life and rebirth. Her role as a protector and nurturer made her a central figure in Egyptian religion, and her influence extended well beyond Egypt, spreading throughout the Mediterranean world. The connectio between Isis, love, and fertility shows just how central these themes were to the Egyptian understanding of both life and death. Love and sexuality in ancient Egypt were also seen as a divine reflection of the relationship between the gods themselves. The relationship between Osiris and Isis, for instance, was one of the most revered love stories in Egyptian mythology. It wasn't just about romantic love, it was about the union of two forces that represented life, death, and regeneration. Their bond was symbolic of the cosmic forces that brought balance to the universe, and this idea was expressed in various myths and religious rituals. Sex and love were not merely human experiences in Egypt. They were seen as part of a divine process that kept the world in harmony. But the Egyptians were not shy about celebrating the more physical aspects of love and sexuality either. Sexuality was not viewed with shame or taboo as it was in many later cultures. Instead, it was seen as a natural and powerful force. In fact, there are numerous examples of erotic art, poetry, and even inscriptions that explore the themes of love and desire. Egyptian love poetry, some of which is recorded on papyrus, speaks of longing, affection, and sensuality in ways that reveal a deep appreciation for the pleasures of love. These poems were often dedicated to the gods or inscribed in tombs to accompany the deceased in the afterlife, showing that love and desire were just as important in the next world as they were in the current one. Sexuality in ancient Egypt wasn't just about personal pleasure, though. It was about creation and divine order. The act of sex was seen as a sacred act of creation, an expression of the godly forces that governed the natural world. The Egyptians also believed that sexuality was essential to the fertility of the land itself. The annual flooding of the Nile was often compared to the act of sexual union with the fertile soil left by the floodwaters, symbolizing the birth of new life. The connection between human sexuality, divine fertility, and the natural world was so profound that it was woven into every aspect of Egyptian life, from religious rituals to agricultural practices. Rituals related to love and fertility were common in ancient Egypt. One such example is the annual festival in honor of Hathor, which involved music, dancing, and even sexual rituals. These festivities were meant to celebrate the abundance of the Nile and to ensure the fertility of the land and the people. During these festivals, women would often pray to Hathor for the blessing of fertility, both in terms of their crops and their ability to conceive children. Sexual rituals and acts were believed to invoke the goddess's favor, and these celebrations were marked by joyous expressions of love and sexuality. But despite the open celebration of sexuality, the Egyptians also had a strong sense of propriety when it came to relationships and marriage. Marriages were often arranged, and family was an important social unit. While the Egyptian elite had access to multiple wives or concubines, for the most part, marriage was seen as a bond between one man and one woman, and fidelity was valued. The relationship between husband and wife was central to the structure of Egyptian society, as they were seen as complementary forces that together brought balance to the world. It's also important to note that the concept of sexual identity and gender roles in ancient Egypt was quite fluid compared to later cultures. While the majority of people adhered to a male-female marriage structure, there is evidence that gender roles weren't as rigid as they would later become in other ancient civilizations. Some scholars argue that the Egyptians had a more complex understanding of gender, one that allowed for expressions of same-sex relationships and fluid identities in certain contexts. Although this is an area of ongoing debate, the fact that Egyptian art often depicted both male and female figures in sexual contexts and that gods and goddesses were often portrayed with both masculine and feminine traits suggests that their understanding of sexuality and gender was not bound by the rigid constraints we may assume. Historians still debate the exact nature of sex and gender in ancient Egypt. especially considering how we interpret the records they left behind. Some believe that the fluidity of gender and sexuality in Egyptian society allowed for more freedom of expression than we see in many other ancient cultures. Others argue that societal norms were still relatively strict, even if there were some exceptions. Nonetheless, it's clear that sexuality, love, and fertility played a vital role in shaping Egyptian religion, art, and society as a whole. Ultimately, the Egyptians saw love and sexuality as powerful, sacred forces that were deeply intertwined with both the physical world and the divine. Their approach was holistic, incorporating spiritual beliefs, physical pleasure, and agricultural cycles into a single, cohesive understanding of human life. From their gods and goddesses to their myths and rituals, the ancient Egyptians had a view of sexuality that was complex, open, and deeply connected to the cycles of nature and the divine. The relationship between the physical and the spiritual was never clearer than in their understanding of sex and love, and it was a central force in the continuation of life both on earth and in the afterlife. As we continue our exploration of ancient Egypt, let's turn our focus to something just as fascinating and mysterious, their food and drink. While we often think of grand monuments, majestic tombs, and powerful pharaohs when we imagine ancient Egypt, food played a surprisingly significant role in their daily lives and rituals. Food was more than just sustenance for the Egyptians. It was an essential part of their culture, spirituality, and even their beliefs about the afterlife. The diet of the ancient Egyptians was primarily plant-based, with bread, beer, and vegetables being the staples of their diet. Bread, in fact, was so important that it became a symbol of life and sustenance. Egyptians baked bread in various forms, round loaves, flatbreads, and even cakes, and it was a key part of every meal. The Egyptians were skilled bakers, and the process of making bread involved a detailed understanding of fermentation and heat. Bread was often paired with beer, which was just as fundamental to Egyptian life. Beer was consumed by people of all social classes, from the labourers building the pyramids to the pharaohs themselves. It was made from barley, water, and dates, fermented into a thick, porridge-like beverage. Beer was so integral to Egyptian culture that it was often used as an offering to the gods, and it was frequently included in the tombs of the deceased, ensuring they would have plenty to drink in the afterlife. But beer and bread were just the beginning. Egyptians also ate a variety of vegetables such as onions, leeks, garlic, lentils, and cucumbers. These vegetables were considered to have both nutritional and medicinal properties. Garlic, for instance, was highly regarded for its health benefits. It was believed to be a powerful remedy for a range of ailments from digestive issues to fatigue. In fact, garlic was so important that it was often found in the tomb of the deceased, symbolizing strength and protection in the afterlife. Fruits, too, played a key role in the Egyptian diet, with figs, dates, pomegranates, and melons being among the most popular. The Egyptians had a deep appreciation for sweetness, and many of their fruits were used to make syrups or preserved in honey, a natural sweetener that was prized in both food and medicine. Honey was also used in religious rituals, where it symbolized the sweetness of life and the favor of the gods. While the majority of the population consumed a plant-based diet, meat was a luxury for the wealthier classes. Those who could afford it ate beef, lamb, goat, and poultry, often prepared with spices and herbs to enhance flavor. Fish was also a common part of the diet, particularly in regions near the Nile. The river's abundant fish supply meant that it was often served at feasts or religious ceremonies, with certain types of fish being associated with specific gods. One of the most interesting aspects of Egyptian food culture was the way it was linked to their religious beliefs. Food and drink were seen not just as physical necessities, but as offerings to the gods, tools for ensuring divine favor, and means of preserving life and health. Temples were often stocked with grain, fruit, and beer to be offered to the gods, and food offerings were an essential part of religious rituals. Even the pharaohs were seen as divine providers, ensuring that the gods were satisfied and that the land remained fertile and prosperous. It was believed that by offering food to the gods, the Egyptians could secure blessings for themselves and their families. The connection between food and spirituality wasn't just limited to the living. Food was also a crucial part of burial practices. In the tombs of the pharaohs, along with their treasures and mummified bodies, were often offerings of food and drink. These offerings were meant to sustain the deceased in the afterlife, ensuring they had everything they needed for their journey through the underworld. The idea was that the soul would continue to require nourishment in the afterlife, and by placing food in the tomb, the Egyptians ensured that their loved ones would be cared for eternally. The Book of the Dead, a guidebook for the deceased, included prayers and spells that requested the gods provide sustenance in the afterlife, ensuring that the deceased would not go hungry or thirsty. Historians still debate whether these food offerings were purely symbolic or if the Egyptians genuinely believed that the dead could consume the offerings. Some argue that these offerings were meant to be consumed by the priests or family members who tended to the tombs, while others believe that the offerings had a spiritual purpose, nourishing the soul of the deceased. The latter view is supported by the fact that food offerings were often left untouched over centuries, leading some to believe that the offerings were intended to be eaten by the deceased in a spiritual sense, ensuring that they could continue to partake in the pleasures of life. While the food rituals of the ancient Egyptians were undoubtedly tied to their religious beliefs, they also reflected their values about life, death, and the natural world. Food was a gift from the gods, and to the Egyptians it represented abundance, sustenance, and the continuity of life. The act of sharing food, whether with the gods, the deceased, or within families, was seen as a way of affirming the bonds that connected the living and the dead. The Egyptians understood that food was not just about survival, it was about maintaining harmony with the gods, sustaining life, and ensuring that the cycle of life, death, and rebirth continued uninterrupted. In this light, the act of eating became an almost sacred ritual, one that reflected the Egyptians' deeper understanding of the divine forces that governed their world. The importance of food in Egyptian culture went beyond just filling one's stomach. It was about ensuring prosperity, sustaining the soul, and maintaining balance within the universe. This holistic view of food and its relationship to both life and death helped shape the way the Egyptians lived, died, and viewed the world around them. Historians still argue over the extent to which the ancient Egyptians understood the nutritional value of the foods they consumed. Some scholars believe they had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of diet and health, while others argue that their culinary practices were rooted more in tradition and religious symbolism than in empirical knowledge. What is certain, however, is that food was central to the Egyptian way of life, and it wasn't just about eating. It was about creating and preserving life in every sense of the word. As we continue unraveling the rich tapestry of ancient Egyptian civilization, let's turn our attention to a site that has captivated archaeologists and adventurers for centuries, the lost city of Heraklion. This ancient Egyptian city, once a powerful port that served as a gateway for trade and religious ceremonies, was thought to be lost to the sands of time. That is, until it was rediscovered in 2000, submerged beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Heraklion, also known as Thonis in Egyptian, was a bustling city located at the mouth of the Nile River. It was once a major trade hub and a religious center, home to temples dedicated to gods like Amun and the great god Osiris. For centuries, historians believed Heraklion was nothing more than a myth, a city spoken of in ancient texts but never confirmed by archaeological evidence. The city's existence had been lost to time, as it was thought to have been destroyed or abandoned long before modern Egyptologists began their work. But the rediscovery of Herakleion, submerged beneath the Mediterranean Sea near the mouth of the Nile, was nothing short of miraculous. In 2000, French underwater archaeologist Frank Godiot and his team began an excavation of the waters off the coast of Egypt. What they uncovered was astonishing, a treasure trove of ancient ruins, statues and artifacts, all submerged under the sea. Herakleion, once thought to be lost forever, had been preserved in the waters for over a millennium. The discovery of Herakleion has provided incredible insights into the economic and religious life of ancient Egypt. The city's size and importance are now becoming clearer as archaeologists continue to unearth new findings. The city's role as a trading hub was paramount. Herakleion was the point of entry for goods from across the Mediterranean and beyond. It's believed that the city's strategic location made it a crucial port for trade between Egypt, Greece, and other ancient civilizations. Goods such as spices, precious metals, and textiles were exchanged here, making Herakleion an essential part of Egypt's economy. In addition to its role as a trade center, Herakleion was also a significant religious site. The city was home to a vast temple complex dedicated to the god Amun, as well as other deities. The ruins of these temples, along with inscriptions and statues found in the city, suggest that Herakleion was a major center of religious activity. Pilgrims from across Egypt and the Mediterranean would come to the city to make offerings and participate in rituals meant to honor the gods and ensure their favor. But the question remains, how did Herakleion end up submerged? Historians and archaeologists have various theories, but the most widely accepted explanation is that the city was swallowed by the sea due to a combination of natural disasters. Earthquakes, floods, and rising sea levels may have caused the city to sink over time. It's possible that the gradual submergence of Herakleion was a slow process, with parts of the city falling into the sea during different periods. It's also believed that the city's location on the banks of the Nile near an active delta made it vulnerable to shifts in the Earth's tectonic plates, which could have contributed to its eventual destruction. While the exact cause of Herakleion's submergence remains a mystery, its rediscovery has shed light on the incredible sophistication of ancient Egyptian society. The statues and artifacts found in the city are of exceptional quality, demonstrating the advanced craftsmanship and artistry of the time. Large, intricately carved stone statues of gods and pharaohs line the city's streets, while inscriptions on monuments provide valuable insight into the religious and political life of the era. The preservation of these artifacts in the water has allowed archaeologists to study them in ways that would not have been possible if the city had been left exposed to the elements. Historians still debate the full significance of Herakleion in the context of ancient Egyptian history. Some see it as a testament to Egypt's vast influence across the Mediterranean, while others view it as a symbol of the fragile nature of even the greatest empires. The fact that a major city could vanish beneath the waves, only to be rediscovered centuries later, serves as a reminder of how time and nature can erase even the most impressive human achievements. The fate of Herakleion is a poignant symbol of the impermanence of civilization, and yet its rediscovery shows that even lost histories can sometimes be reclaimed. The lost city of Herakleion has also contributed to the growing body of knowledge about ancient Egyptian shipbuilding. A number of shipwrecks have been found in the vicinity, providing evidence that the Egyptians were expert sailors who navigated the Mediterranean Sea with skill. This challenges the common perception that Egypt was a landlocked civilization limited to river navigation. The city's maritime connections demonstrate the Egyptians' far-reaching influence and their ability to interact with cultures across the seas. The artifacts and statues found at Herakleion also hint to the cosmopolitan nature of the city. Many of the statues found are of Greek and Egyptian gods, suggesting a blending of cultures and beliefs. This is particularly evident in the discovery of a large statue of the god Osiris, which appears to have been carved in a Greek style. The fusion of Greek and Egyptian elements in Heracleion is just one example of how the two cultures interacted and influenced each other over the centuries. Heracleion, with its strategic location at the crossroads of Africa and Europe, was a melting pot of ideas, art, and commerce. Historians still argue about the exact relationship between Egypt and Greece, especially during the period when Heracleion flourished. Were the Greeks simply traders in Egyptian territory, or were they allies, partners in a more complex exchange of goods and ideas? The discoveries at Heracleion provide us with clues, but the full picture remains elusive. What is certain, however, is that the lost city serves as a testament to the dynamic and interconnected world of the ancient Mediterranean. For all its grandeur and historical significance, Heracleion remains an enigma, a lost city of Egypt that has been brought back to life by the efforts of modern archaeologists. The ruins of the city continue to reveal their secrets, offering a glimpse into a world long submerged by the tides of time. As excavation continues, we can expect to learn even more about this forgotten gem of ancient Egypt, and perhaps uncover even more answers to the questions that have surrounded it for centuries. As we reach the final stretch of our journey through ancient Egypt, it's time to explore the collapse of this great civilization. For all the grandeur, mysticism, and achievements of the Egyptians, their civilization eventually came to an end. The reasons behind the fall of ancient Egypt are complex, multifaceted, and still debated among historians. But what is clear is that the decline of Egypt wasn't a sudden event. It was the result of many factors, both internal and external, that slowly weakened the once mighty empire. One of the primary factors contributing to Egypt's decline was a series of invasions and foreign occupations. The ancient Egyptians had long prided themselves on their ability to resist foreign invaders, but over time the pressure from neighboring empires and nations became too great. During the late New Kingdom period, Silas 1070 BCE, Egypt was weakened by a series of invasions, starting with the Sea Peoples, mysterious groups of marauders who attacked Egypt's coastal regions. These invaders, whose origins remain uncertain, wreaked havoc along the Mediterranean coastline, further destabilizing the empire. In addition to the Sea Peoples, Egypt was increasingly beset by incursions from the Libyans, Nubians, and Assyrians who sought to control Egypt's wealth, resources, and strategic location. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt's political and military power had begun to wane, and the once proud nation found itself under the influence of these neighboring powers. The loss of military dominance and the inability to defend against invaders significantly weakened Egypt's once imposing empire. The foreign domination of Egypt continued through the centuries, with the Persians seizing control in the 6th century BCE, followed by the arrival of the Greeks under Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. Alexander's conquest of Egypt marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period, during which Egypt became a part of the Greek-controlled Ptolemaic kingdom. While the Ptolemies, notably Cleopatra, were able to maintain Egypt's prominence for a time, the kingdom's ultimate absorption into the Roman Empire in 30 BCE effectively marked the end of Egypt as an independent civilization. Yet external invaders weren't the only reason for Egypt's fall. Internally, there were a number of factors that contributed to the civilization's decline. One of the most significant was political instability. In the later periods of ancient Egypt, the pharaohs became increasingly weak, and their power was often undermined by internal struggles for control. As the central authority weakened, regional governors and priests gained more influence, and Egypt's unity began to fragment. The royal succession was often marked by intrigue, assassination, and civil war, further weakening the fabric of Egyptian society. Another contributing factor to Egypt's decline was the economic strain caused by centuries of warfare, monumental construction projects, and a reliance on slave labor. As the empire became more fragmented, the cost of maintaining the vast infrastructure, military and religious institutions became unsustainable. Trade routes, once a vital source of wealth and prosperity for Egypt, began to shift as new powers arose in the Mediterranean and beyond, further weakening Egypt's economic base. The once fertile Nile Delta also faced environmental challenges, including periods of drought, which may have contributed to food shortages and further economic instability. The loss of Egypt's traditional religious practices and the erosion of its belief in the divine authority of the pharaoh also played a role in the civilization's downfall. As Egypt became more influenced by foreign cultures, particularly the Greeks and Romans, the role of the pharaoh shifted. The once dominant belief that the pharaoh was a divine ruler, an intermediary between the gods and the people, lost its significance. Egypt's religious institutions, which had long provided the foundation for the kingdom's social order, began to lose their power and influence, further destabilizing society. Historians still debate the exact causes of Egypt's fall, and some believe that it was a combination of these internal and external factors that contributed to the civilization's gradual decline. There's also the idea that Egypt's own greatness contributed to its downfall. As Egypt became more powerful and wealthy, it attracted more enemies, and its rulers' desire to expand their empire led to overextension. The sheer scale of Egypt's monumental achievements, from the Great Pyramids to the temples of Karnak, became a testament to their greatness, but also to their vulnerability. Their attempt to maintain such grand ambitions, both politically and architecturally, ultimately made the civilization less able to adapt to the changing world around them. While ancient Egypt's independence came to an end, its legacy continued to inspire and influence cultures long after its collapse. The Greeks, Romans, and later civilizations were drawn to Egypt's monumental architecture, religious symbolism, and cultural practices. The pyramids and temples of Egypt became symbols of mystery and grandeur, attracting scholars, explorers, and tourists for centuries to come. The fascination with Egypt, its art and its history continues to this day. And then there is the fact that despite the fall on, if Egypt as a political power, much of its culture, art and spiritual practices lived on, the influence of Egyptian thought and imagery was woven into the fabric of the cultures that succeeded it, particularly the Greeks and Romans, who adopted many aspects of Egyptian religion, art and iconography. Even in modern times, Egypt's legacy continues to shape our understanding of ancient civilizations, influencing everything from architecture to philosophy, literature, and even popular culture. The end of ancient Egypt, while marking the collapse of a great empire, also signified the resilience and continuity of its cultural contributions. While Egypt's political power may have waned, its identity as a civilization of profound wisdom, artistic brilliance, and spiritual depth remains as strong as ever. Today, Egypt stands as both a symbol of human achievement and a reminder of the fleeting nature of empires. Its monuments, treasures, and legacies continue to captivate the world, and as long as we remember Egypt, its story is far from over. As we wrap up our journey through ancient Egypt, remember that while the civilization itself has long since passed, its secrets, wonders, and knowledge continue to influence and inspire us. From the majestic pyramids to the mysteries of the afterlife, the Egyptians left behind a treasure trove of history that still calls to us today. Their story is one of resilience, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of the human spirit, a story that will endure as long as their monuments stand.